It is 1:51 in the morning on March 18th, 1990. In a second-floor gallery inside a fake Venetian palace in Boston, a man with a knife is cutting a Rembrandt out of its frame. He does not cut carefully. The canvas is 33 square feet, Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, painted in 1633, the only known seascape Rembrandt ever produced. It is worth more than $140 million. The man peels it off the backing in pieces. Shards of glass litter the marble floor. The painting will never recover from the next 90 minutes. Downstairs, in the basement boiler room, 2 night guards are handcuffed to pipes with duct tape across their mouths. They are both in their 20s. Neither of them is going to die tonight. Neither of them can believe what is happening above their heads. In the blue room, another thief takes a small Manet from the wall. Around the corner, someone rips a Napoleonic bronze eagle from the top of a silk flag. The Vermeer comes off next. 5 Degas sketches. A Chinese beaker from the Shang dynasty. A small Rembrandt etching the size of a postage stamp. The 2 men in police uniforms will leave the building at 2:45 in the morning. They will take 13 works of art. They will leave behind a Titian that is worth more than everything they are carrying. This is not a story about the smartest criminals of the 20th century. It is a story about the opposite, and about a woman who died 66 years before any of this happened, who made absolutely certain, in her will, that the damage these 2 men were about to cause could never be repaired. This is the story of the largest property crime in the history of the United States. 13 works of art, $500 million, 36 years of silence. We are going to go inside the building on the night it happened, minute by minute. We are going to meet the guard who opened the door. We are going to follow the paintings from a fake Venetian palace in Boston, through a body found in a Cadillac trunk, to a shed behind a house in Connecticut where the FBI, 22 years later, would dig up an empty plastic tub. And we are going to sit with the conclusion most people refuse to accept, that the 13 works of art the world has been waiting on for 36 years are probably not in a vault somewhere in Europe. They were probably destroyed by the men who stole them. And the empty frames that still hang in the museum today are not waiting for a return. They are a record of what was lost. Isabella Stewart Gardner was born in New York in 1840, and she married into Boston money in 1860. She spent the next 40 years making the Brahmin establishment of her adopted city uncomfortable. She walked lions on leashes at the zoo. She commissioned John Singer Sargent to paint her in a dress so low cut that her husband had the portrait removed from public display. She collected art the way other people collected grudges, obsessively, personally, without regard for what anyone else thought. She bought a Rembrandt because it moved her. She bought a Vermeer because she understood, before most of the United States did, that there were only 36 Vermeers in the world. When her husband Jack died suddenly of a stroke in December 1898, Isabella bought a piece of marshland in a Boston neighborhood called the Fenway. She hired an architect. She built a palace. Fenway Court opened on January 1st, 1903. It was modeled on a 15th century Venetian palazzo. More than 2,500 objects had been placed inside by Isabella herself, in an arrangement she considered final. She lived in the top-floor apartment for the next 21 years. She died in 1924. Her will was very specific. The collection was to remain exactly as she had left it. No object was to be added. No object was to be sold. No object was to be moved from the location she had chosen for it. If any of these rules were violated, if even one sculpture were repositioned, the entire collection would be transferred to Harvard University, and the museum would cease to exist. It is the strictest preservation clause any major American collection has ever been placed under. It is also, as the events of 1990 would make clear, the most dangerous. Because when 13 of the objects Isabella Stewart Gardner had placed in her museum were cut out of their frames and carried into the Boston night, her will meant the frames themselves could not be taken down. They could not be replaced. They could not even be covered. They had to keep hanging, exactly where she had put them. Empty. Rick Abath was 23 years old on the night of the theft. He was a musician. He played guitar in a local band. By every account, he was a Grateful Dead fan who had taken the job at the Gardner because it paid the rent, and because it let him think about other things while he walked around a quiet building at night. The Gardner Museum, in 1990, was not the kind of institution that employed serious people as night guards. The FBI had warned the museum in 1982 that Boston criminals were considering it as a target. The museum had responded by installing 60 infrared motion detectors and 4 closed-circuit television cameras. It had not responded by training its staff or hardening its procedures. On the night of March 17th into the morning of March 18th, Abath began his overnight shift. His partner was a second guard in his early 20s named Randy Heston. Neither of them had been trained in anything resembling security protocol. At 12:27 a.m., Abath completed a normal patrol through the galleries. At 12:48 a.m., something happened that the investigators have never been able to explain. Abath briefly opened and then closed a secured side door on the museum's Palace Road side. He was not supposed to open that door. He had no reason to open that door. No delivery was scheduled. No visitor was expected. The door, when he opened it, briefly broke the security seal and then reset when he closed it. He told investigators he was checking the lock. 36 minutes later, 2 men in Boston police uniforms pulled up in front of that exact same door. At 1:24 a.m., they rang the buzzer and said they were investigating a disturbance. Abath looked at them on the security monitor. They looked like police officers. He buzzed them in. Once inside, the 2 men told Abath to step away from the desk. They told him there was a warrant out for his arrest. They handcuffed him. They handcuffed Hestand when he came up from the basement to see what was happening. They taped their mouths shut. They walked them both down to the boiler room in the basement. They handcuffed them to pipes. Then they went upstairs. 81 minutes later, the motion detector system had recorded their movement through almost every room in the museum. Almost. Because the motion detectors in the blue room, the room where Manet's Chez Tortoni was taken off the wall, never triggered. Not once during the entire night of March 17th into March 18th, the only person the blue room detectors recorded was Rick Abath on his earlier patrol. That detail has never been resolved. The FBI agent who ran the case in its first years concluded the guards could not have pulled it off. Abath maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. He wrote a graduate thesis about the heist in 2015. He insisted he was a victim of coincidence. He died in February 2024. Whatever he knew, whatever the door at 12:48 and the silent motion detectors actually meant, he took with him. The men who went upstairs were not art experts. That became clear within the first 15 minutes. They went first to the Dutch room. They approached Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the painting worth in 1990 more than the gross domestic product of several small countries. They did not lift it off the wall. They did not carry it frame and all. They took out a knife and began cutting the canvas from its wooden stretcher. The cuts were jagged. They damaged the paint. They left strips of canvas hanging in the frame. In the conservation community, this is the single most damning fact of the entire heist. A professional art thief does not cut a Rembrandt. The canvas is the painting. Any damage to it is damage to the value. Only someone treating the object as a trophy or a hostage would cut it. They did it to 2 Rembrandts that night. They did it to the Vermeer. Then they went into the short gallery and approached a silk flag mounted on the wall. On top of the flag was a small bronze eagle, a Napoleonic finial from an early 19th century military standard. It was not one of the most valuable objects in the building. It was probably not even one of the 200 most valuable. They took it. The logic of what they took is the central mystery of the 81 minutes. They took 5 Degas sketches. They took a flink landscape that had, for most of its history, been misattributed to Rembrandt and was worth a fraction of what a real Rembrandt would be. And when they walked past a room containing a full-size Titian, one of the most valuable paintings in the entire building, they left it on the wall. They did not know it was there, or they did not know what it was, or they had a list, and the list was not designed by anyone who understood European painting. At some point during the burglary, one of them went into the security office and removed the videotape that had captured their entry. The tape was never recovered. The FBI would later release partial surveillance footage from the night before, footage showing an unauthorized person being led into the museum by a bath on the evening of March 17th. That visit has also never been fully explained. At 2:45 a.m., the 2 men loaded 13 works of art into a vehicle parked on Palace Road and drove away. The alarm that was supposed to alert the Boston police had been silenced when the thieves cut the telephone line. The motion detector data, a long strip of paper from a dot matrix printer, was designed to be reviewed later if anyone thought there was a reason to review it. Nobody thought to review it until morning. By then, everything was gone. Anne Hawley, the director of the museum, arrived that morning and saw the damage: frames on the floor, shards of glass, canvas fragments, empty hooks on walls where paintings had been for 87 years. She called the police. She called the FBI. She called the Board of Trustees. And at some point during that first day, someone in the museum's administration had to confront a second problem. The empty spaces on the walls could not be covered up. Isabella Stewart Gardner's will, written in 1919, prohibited the museum from moving objects, replacing objects, or altering the visual arrangement she had designed. The legal language was enforced by a trigger clause. Any significant alteration, and the entire collection would transfer to Harvard. Lawyers were consulted. The clause held. The frames had to stay on the wall, which meant that for every visitor who walked into the Gardner Museum from 1990 onward, the theft would not be something that had happened in the past. It would be something happening in the room with them. The frames, including Rembrandt's Storm, the Vermeer, the Manet, and the Flink, were still there, empty, hanging at the exact height Isabella had chosen, with the wall behind them still bearing the faint outline of the canvases that were gone. It is one of the strangest decisions any major cultural institution has ever been forced to make. Stop here for a moment. A woman who had been dead for 66 years had ensured that the theft of her paintings would be visible every day to every visitor for as long as her museum existed. She could not have predicted the theft. She had predicted something more fundamental, that things taken from her collection should not be replaced, that absence, if it came, should be felt. The museum could not heal. She had made sure of it. Within weeks of the heist, the FBI had narrowed its focus to a specific circle of Boston area criminals. The leading candidate was Robert Donati, known as Bobby. He was in his early 50s, a low-ranking associate of the Patriarca crime family, who had spent most of his adult life doing jobs for other people. His boss, Vincent Ferrara, had been arrested in late 1989 on racketeering charges. Donati was terrified that without Ferrara on the street, he would not survive the factional fighting inside the Patriarca family. He needed leverage. According to later accounts from the convicted art thief, Miles Connor, from anonymous associates, and from a retired FBI agent who published a book in early 2026, Donati's plan was to steal something so valuable that he could trade it. Not sell it on the black market, trade it for Ferrara's release. Or, failing that, for his own protection. "They will pay for these," Donati is reported to have said. "You'll see." He had been inside the Gardner Museum before. He knew the building. He knew the side door on Palace Road. He had the kind of mid-level criminal confidence that convinces a man he can pull off a job of this scale without understanding what the scale actually is. The plan did not work. No ransom was delivered. No negotiation took place. Ferrara was not released. The art did not move through any recognized channel. On September 24th, 1991, Bobby Donati's body was found in the trunk of his own Cadillac, parked a short distance from his house in Vermeer. He had been bound. He had been beaten. He had been stabbed. His killer was never identified. Whatever Donati knew about the location of the paintings, he took into the trunk with him. After Donati's death, the investigation shifted to the people who might have helped him move the art. The name that recurs most often is Carmelo Merlino. He ran an auto body shop in Dorchester. When he was arrested in 1999 for planning an armored car robbery, agents searched his home and found newspaper clippings about the Gardner heist carefully preserved. Through Merlino, investigators traced a chain. David Turner, a member of Merlino's crew, George Reisfelder, another associate who died in 1991, and Robert Guarente, a Maine criminal who, according to his widow, took possession of at least some of the stolen paintings in the late 1990s and passed them to a man named Robert Gentile before his own death in 2004. Robert Gentile lived in Manchester, Connecticut. He was 76 years old when the FBI first searched his home in 2012. He had a shed in the backyard. The search was conducted with ground-penetrating radar. Agents dug under the floor of the shed. What they found was a Rubbermaid storage tub. The tub was empty. What they also found, tucked inside a copy of the Boston Herald from March of 1990, the day after the heist, was a handwritten list. On it were the names of the 13 works stolen from the Gardner Museum. Next to each name was a number. The numbers were estimated black market values. The art had been close enough to Gentile to be written down. Whether it had ever been in the shed or in the house or somewhere else he knew about, he would never say. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in federal prison on an unrelated firearms charge. He served it. He was released. He died in 2021 at the age of 85. he took whatever he knew with him. Here is what almost no one who has covered this case is willing to say clearly. The 13 works of art stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum on the morning of March 18, 1990, are probably not intact. They are probably not in a vault in Switzerland. They are probably not in a billionaire's private gallery in Hong Kong. The elegant theory, the one that has animated 36 years of speculation, is almost certainly wrong. The paintings were cut out of their frames with knives by men who did not understand that cutting is the worst thing you can do to a canvas. They were rolled up, they were wrapped in cloth, in plastic, in whatever was available. They were transported in cars, stored in basements, in sheds, in attics. Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee is 3.5 centuries old. It survived on the wall at the Gardner because that wall was climate controlled. 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% humidity. The paint chemistry depends on those numbers. Above them, paint flakes. Below them, paint cracks. In damp conditions, mold forms. In dry conditions, the canvas pulls and tears itself. The men who stole the paintings were not collectors. They were not curators. They were not, by the standard of any serious art thief, professionals. They were low-level mob associates trying to turn their loot into cash or leverage, and the plan collapsed within a year. The art was too famous. The sellers were too exposed. What happens to a Rembrandt in a damp basement for 3 decades? What happens to a Vermeer rolled in a sheet, passed between 3 different men in 3 different states, stored in a Rubbermaid tub under a shed floor in Manchester, Connecticut? The answer most art conservators are willing to give, off the record, is that the paintings are probably gone. Not missing, gone. Decayed past the point where restoration would be possible, or destroyed at some point between 1991 and 2012 by someone who panicked when the heat got closer and decided that burning a canvas was safer than being caught with it. This is the possibility the museum has never publicly accepted. It is also the possibility the FBI has never publicly ruled out. In 2013, the FBI announced it knew who the thieves were. It did not release the names. It did not matter. The statute of limitations on the original crime had expired. The thieves, even if identified, could not be prosecuted. The case had become something else, not a criminal investigation, an archaeological one, a search for objects, not for perpetrators. In 2017, the museum raised the reward from $5 million to $10 million, with a deadline of December 31st. The deadline passed. Nobody came forward. The museum has said, repeatedly, that it will offer immunity to anyone involved in the current possession of the art. It does not want the thieves. It wants the paintings no one has collected. Rick Abath died in February 2024. He was 57. He had spent the last 34 years being the person on the other end of every dinner party conversation about unsolved crime. He had always said the same thing. He had not known they were thieves. He had been young and afraid, and the motion detectors were someone else's problem. Bobby Donati, murdered in 1991. George Reisfelder, dead of a cocaine overdose 3 months after the heist. Carmelo Merlino, dead in federal prison in 2005. Robert Guarente, dead in 2004. Robert Gentile, dead in 2021. David Turner, released from federal prison in 2019, has never been charged in connection with the Gardner case. He has said nothing. Every other person who might know where the 13 works went or where they ended is already buried. Walk into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum today and you will see the frames. They hang at the exact heights Isabella chose, in the exact room she designed, on walls that have not been repainted since the theft. Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee is not there. The Vermeer is not there. The Manet is not there. The Degas sketches are not there. The Napoleonic eagle is not there. What is there is the outline of where they were. The shadow of the canvas against the wall, lighter than the paint around it. The hardware still in place. The small placards describing what each painting was in the present tense, as if it might walk back through the door. The frames are empty because Isabella Stewart Gardner wrote that into a will in 1919. She could not have imagined that her claws would one day make her museum a monument to a theft. But that is what it has become, a building that cannot heal, forced by its own founder to display its wound. Somewhere, probably Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee no longer exists in any form a conservator could restore. Somewhere, the Vermeer is gone. Somewhere, a woman in a black dress painted by Rembrandt 400 years ago has been rolled up, unrolled, rolled up, and finally, probably, either burned or forgotten. The empty frames will not come down. The art will not come back. What was stolen in 1990 was not 13 objects. It was the wholeness of a dream that a woman built out of 100,000 decisions across 58 years of her life. She wanted it kept exactly. She got exactly that, including the gap. If stories like this one are why you came here, there are more coming. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.